Your tomatoes can look perfect one morning and start splitting open the next, even when you think you are watering correctly. That happened in my bed this week. I soaked the plants after 3 dry days, and by morning, half my biggest fruit had cracks running down from the stem. My first thought was simple. They are finally filling out after all that dry weather. So I kept watering the same way, heavy soak whenever the soil felt bone dry, thinking I was doing the right thing. 2 days later, the cracks had spread to fruit that looked perfect the morning before, and the skin around the old splits had gone dark and soft. Stop waiting for the soil to dry out completely between waterings. Push a finger 2 inches down next to the root zone every morning, and if it feels dry at that depth, give the bed a light drink right then, not a flood 3 days later. That crack near the stem is not the fruit bulking up from a good soak. Picture the skin as a balloon someone is inflating in short, hard puffs instead of one steady breath. The inside grows in a burst when water finally arrives after a dry stretch, and the skin cannot stretch fast enough to keep up, so it splits at the thinnest point, right where it meets the stem. Most of the roots doing the actual drinking sit in the top 6 to 8 inches of soil, which is exactly why that quick finger check tells you more than staring at the surface ever will. There is another reason this works better than guessing from the surface. The surface can look dry and crusty, while 6 inches down the soil is still holding plenty of moisture, or the opposite, looking damp on top while the root zone underneath has already gone dust dry. Once you switch to small, steady waterings instead of feast and famine, new fruit stops splitting within about a week. Cracking is not the only thing happening to your tomatoes right now, and it is not always tied to the same root problem. Take a look at the bottom of your fruit. If you see a flat, water-soaked patch near the blossom end that turns leathery and dark brown, your first guess is probably a calcium shortage in the soil, and most gardeners reach for a calcium spray. In a lot of home gardens, the soil already has plenty of calcium, and the spray does nothing because that is not where the gap is. Calcium only moves through the plant dissolved in water, and when watering swings between dry and soaked, that mineral simply cannot reach the fruit fast enough during the gaps. Keep the moisture level steady through the week, and a calcium spray becomes unnecessary in most home gardens. The spray is not wrong as a product. The timing is wrong, because applying it to a plant that cannot move calcium through its system does nothing useful. A 2-inch layer of straw or shredded leaves spread over the soil around each plant slows down how fast that moisture swings between waterings, which does more for blossom end rot over a season than any bottle on the shelf. Lower leaves yellowing in the middle of summer throw people off in a different way. The bed still gets watered, the soil still tests fine, so the obvious suspect is nitrogen, and out comes the fertilizer. Pull back the lower foliage and look at how packed those stems are against each other. Dense growth traps humid air against the leaves and blocks airflow at the base, and that is what triggers yellowing and leaf drop long before nitrogen runs short. Plants set closer than about 2 feet apart almost always show this first, since the air between them barely moves even on a breezy afternoon. The leaves closest to the soil stay in that trapped air longest, which is why the yellowing starts at the bottom and climbs. Strip the leaves below the first fruit cluster and space the suckers out, and the yellowing usually stops within days. No fertilizer required. Pruning suckers under a noon sun feels efficient, since you are already out there checking the bed anyway. The cut itself is fine. What happens next is the problem. A fresh wound sits open for hours in the heat, and the first watering or rainfall after that carries fungal spores straight into the stem tissue through that cut. Stem rot often shows up at that kind of wound days later. A soft, dark patch right where the cut was made, and by then the damage is already inside the plant. The plant may start sealing that cut overnight, but a fresh cut made the next afternoon starts the whole process over again. Move pruning to early morning or evening when the plant can seal the wound before the next watering, and skip pruning entirely the day before you plan to water heavily. Feeding the bed fertilizer the moment it looks a little tired in the heat seems like the safe move, a kind of insurance. On dry soil, a concentrated dose of fertilizer pulls moisture out of the surrounding root hairs instead of feeding them, and those roots scorch from the inside before the plant even shows a visible reaction above ground. By the time you see leaf edges browning from this, the damage to that section of root has already happened, and feeding more on top of it only makes the burn worse. Water the bed first, let it soak in fully, then feed at half the usual strength during a heat stretch. A plant that has just been watered moves nutrients efficiently. A plant sitting in dry soil cannot use concentrated fertilizer efficiently, which is why the risk of root damage rises so quickly. Grabbing the hose straight from an outdoor spigot in the middle of a 90-degree afternoon feels harmless, since the plant clearly needs water badly. That water sitting in a black hose under direct sun runs far hotter than you would guess, baked by the sun for hours before it ever reaches the soil. And dropping that hot water onto already heat-stressed root stalls growth for a day or two while the plant recovers from the temperature swing rather than the dry spell. Most gardeners never think about hose temperature because the damage is invisible and delayed. The setback often shows up later as slowed fruit development rather than immediate wilting. Let a few gallons run out and cool down before it hits the root zone, or fill a watering can and let it sit in the shade for 20 minutes first. Upper leaves curling into a tight tube by early afternoon sends a lot of gardeners straight to disease forms, hunting for a virus. Come back and check those same leaves after sunset. If they have flattened back out by evening, the plant rolled them on purpose to cut down on water loss through the leaf surface during the hottest hours, the same way you would squint against bright light. That rolling is a defense, not a disease. A real viral curl stays rolled around the clock and shows up alongside mottled or distorted new growth, often paired with stunted new leaves that never reach full size even once temperatures drop. Shade cloth over the bed during the worst afternoon hours and a solid layer of mulch keep that daytime curling from happening in the first place. A 2-inch layer of mulch over the bed does more to fix this whole list than any single product you could buy, because it slows down exactly that kind of swing, keeping the soil at a steadier moisture and temperature no matter what the afternoon throws at it. Straw works for this. So does shredded leaves from last fall. So does plain untreated grass clippings spread thin enough that they do not mat down into a soggy layer. What matters is coverage, not the material. Pull the mulch back an inch or two from the actual stem so the base stays dry and does not invite stem rot. Then let it run out to the drip line where the roots are doing most of the drinking. That one layer helps stabilize moisture, moderate soil temperature, and reduce the stress that drives several of these problems. A bed that was drying out and re-wetting every 2 or 3 days before mulching often stretches to 4 or 5 days between waterings once that layer goes down. And that gap is often enough to reduce cracking, blossom end rot, and curling leaves at the same time because all three are commonly made worse by the same moisture swings. Check the mulch depth once a week instead of assuming it stays put. Rain packs it down, wind shifts it toward one side of the bed, and birds digging for grubs can expose bare soil in a single afternoon. A thin spot in the mulch is a thin spot in your protection, and that is often where the next crack or the next rot patch shows up first, right under the gap. Right now, in the middle of summer, your tomato plant is doing 2 demanding jobs at once. It is still growing new stems and leaves while also ripening the fruit it already set. And that double workload is exactly why these 7 mistakes hit harder this month than they would in June or September. A plant with steady moisture and a few inches of mulch handles that double load without flinching. One pushed into constant swings between dry and soaked spends, its energy recovering instead of producing. Every single one of these 7 mistakes is fixable without buying anything new. A few days of inconsistent watering will show up as cracks, soft spots, or stalled growth within about a week if the swings keep happening. The fix costs nothing and takes 10 minutes, checking soil moisture with a finger before you decide whether to water at all, and laying down mulch once instead of fighting these same problems separately for the rest of the season. Drop a comment with which one of these 7 hit your own bed this week. Hit like if this saved you from chasing the wrong fix on a healthy plant. Share it with another gardener who is fighting the same problems right now, and subscribe so the next rescue guide on a different crop lands in your feed before the problem starts.